Well, hi, Carlo. First thing I've got to ask you, is it okay to record this to use for my
Paddy?
knowledge?
Yep, no problem. Record away, my friend.
Right. So, going back to my first assignment, where I was looking at ways to converse or discuss Christian faith with another faith, I chose Islam, and I came across a lady called Christine Amal Maloui, and where she has peacemaking as a witness, and I use that as my premise. And the quote was, Christian peacemaking is attempting to help people experience life as we understand God intends it to be lived. That empowers them to make life-giving choices of peace in place of unrest and violence, love in place of hate, forgiveness in place of retaliation, hope and courage in place of fear, joy in place of despair, life, not death, and freedom, not bondage. Now,
Amen.
my thinking on that is, can peacemaking as a witness really work with regard to Islam? And I'm basing that on the two conversations I also had, one with Adrian, who's done this work previously, or continues to do this work with his parish, the Muslims in his parish, and then a follow-up conversation with our former colleague Raja. And I'd looked at the history, and I'd looked at how there are similarities in many ways, and I put my idea to Raja, and he basically said, yeah, this has been covered by Islam anyway. So whatever I put across was not, well, according to Raja, had already been covered. So in view of this, we as Christians believe our way is right, our theological, our religious way is right. But looking at Raja's point of view, he believes Islam is the only way, and that's you can't have two pluralities. Is basically what I'm saying. And what do you say to that?
Well, I say that you can have a spirit of conversation and discussion, but where you've got two entities that both believe they're the ultimate final decision in a theological discussion, it's really difficult to move stuff on from there. I think there's an unwritten sort of taint to conversion. Conversion might not say it, but it implies that people are either physically, morally, psychologically moved from one position to another. And my interpretation of what God's asking is not that we convert people, it's not our job anyway, it's his job, but we help people become disciples. They choose to follow God. And
Yeah,
we can illustrate that and show that. And in testimonies, we can show, especially in our own experiential feeling of God, where we have experienced God, that is an undeniable thing that nobody else can tamper with. It's me
I mean,
explaining to you.
I'll pick up on that, because when you say have dialogue, there's a guy called Martin Acard who basically said this: the word dialogue today is often misunderstood, because the conservative will view it inevitably leading to syncretism, so that's a watching, a diluting, whereas the liberal will feel be used as a vehicle for polemics, so that's one people set against another. The religious will feel to engage in dialogue less it forces to compromise, and that's what we're talking about, I
Yeah.
think. Whereas the secular will shun it as a platform for the assertion of exclusion. And leading on from that, Timothy Tennant says, from the Christian perspective, the question is not some etymological conundrum to be solved, it's a life or death thing. And he goes on to say, so Muslims need to be reconciled through Jesus, not through human efforts. But then Muslims would say Christians need to submit. They're they're the people that have gone astray to the will of Allah. And I'd like to think there'd be a case, whereas we look at the Bible and explore it and say, where has this come from? What date has this come from? I think in Islam, there's not that willing to question it too much, because they believe it's from Muhammad. It's God breathed to Muhammad, and he's just reciting what God has told him through the angel Jibril. But Masood and Al-Katabi both say, it may contain the message of Muhammad, but not the whole message. Because Katabi says, at the Battle of Yamama, in the combat there, many Muslims were injured, and Abu Bakr panicked. So he gathered all those surviving people together and got written down what they already had, what they already been told. So it might not have been the entire writings and thoughts of Muhammad, or the thoughts of Muhammad. And going on from that, there's many Christian denominations, and so there must be so many Muslim denominations, or slight variations. Let's put it that way, because Hughes and Daniels and Farah basically say there's many different Muslim groups, and they use Islam to their cultural or traditional understanding that's most authentic to them. And they also use texts and rituals and practices which suit them and which they handpick, or they just, they choose what they want to choose. So in that regard, there are many similarities between Christians and Muslims in their practice and the way they take bits and bobs from their religion. So do you think, because we've got like a couple of minutes left, do you think peacemaking as a witness is a way to go?
Well, honest dialogue's got to be better than no dialogue, but yeah. I'm not a great believer in it being the prime mover.
Yeah.
Not with Muslims for other reasons, but not with things like Jews will have the same ideological problems. They come to us, or if they're religious, if they're devout in their faith, they will come, just like most Christians, reinforced from within by their faith, that their faith is the one that is right. And as we discussed, you can have written evidence, but then people will question where that written evidence came from and how you got it. You can have verbal hearsay elements. Somebody told me this and somebody told me that. Even if that later becomes written, it started off as an oral tradition. And again, it's the same thing. Where's the evidence for that? How that could have been falsified or whatever. I believe that the only evidence that actually always stands up to scrutiny is people's personal experience of God. Now, until we can, because you can give somebody a Bible or a Quran and go, read that, and you'll know a bit about what I do. That's an explanation, right? Okay, so brief handbook, read that, and then you can have some questions. That doesn't really answer what people want. You can have a chat with them, but then you've got rival ideologies that are almost, even if the individuals want to meet a point of consensus, their very faith will keep them from being able to do that, because there'll come some sticking point at which you can't budge without diminishing your own faith. A Jew might say, well, Jesus was never the Messiah. A Muslim might say, yeah, but he never died. He was just a man. A Christian can't temporize on the fact that actually we believe that he was the Son of God and he was nailed to a cross and he did die and he did get resurrected. There's a point there at which you can't dodge the bullet anymore. You either accept that what you say is true, and by doing so, you automatically believe what they say.
Yeah.
It can't not be God's son and a man at the same time. He cannot be alive and dead at the same time. He cannot be somebody who pretended to die and but was really nailed to a cross. All those things cannot happen in the same polarity. So I think that
And
whilst
I
you
mean,
can do all that,
and I mean, yeah, and I just think this is my last bit, but I'll have to wrap it up. But and this is the point I covered with Raja, was taking that step of understanding and believing to become apostate and believe in Christianity from Islam is a massive, massive step, because it can mean isolation and ultimately death. And he agreed, and he goes, and I think I asked him, is it a step too far? And he goes, I think, and he just nodded his head, I think. But I mean, I'm going to finish it with this, because if you look at the Bible, in Luke 5, it's in Matthew 5, it says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you, falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So I think we sort of have to try and show the love of God and that peaceful message. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you and stop the recording.